we went into lockdown, but it was a hard lockdown where there was curfews and yeah, it was really intense, and the cruise ships stopped, and they stopped in March of 2020, and they haven't been back since, and
Okay.
there is no plan for them to be back. I don't know when they will be back, so
Okay.
that's a big
And the Cayman Islands, I suppose the Cayman Islands would be, when you think about the Cayman Islands, and we did talk about this a couple of weeks ago, tourism is massive in the Cayman Islands, isn't
yeah,
it? And those cruise ships are so important to the
yeah.
Cayman Islands and for livelihoods. But it sounds like that essentially, the government there or the ruling authorities weren't going to take any chances with
Absolutely. Yeah, no,
COVID spreading.
they definitely, I feel like, and everyone now looking back, I feel they definitely took people first. And it really did seem like very drastic in the beginning, because people obviously lost their jobs. And I know so many people that had to leave Ireland because they worked in hotels, and they would have worked, and their main jobs would have been dealing with tourists. But the government just, I guess, did what they felt they had to do, and in the long run, it's worked. And
Mm.
like, obviously it was really drastic, but they looked after, I guess, the people and the health first, and it
Yes,
really has paid off.
because back in Ireland around March 2020, there was a massive furore in Ireland. The Six Nations rugby was due to start, and the rugby match ended up being cancelled. The Six Nations being postponed, but uh, the topic of conversation in the media in Ireland at the time was, lots of Italian rugby fans who would have booked
Yeah,
tickets to Dublin for the weekend were just going to come in here anyway. And, at the time, it seemed a lot of Irish people wanted flights from Italy at the time stopped coming in because it was really a COVID hotspot. And I, now I don't know what the numbers were, but we do know that there were some flights, some rugby fans did come in here.
yeah,
And I suppose, looking back in hindsight, that was a mistake. We are an island here in Ireland, albeit we're a bigger island than
yeah.
the Cayman Islands collectively. But we are an island, and you could say that we imported the virus anyway to start with. But I suppose, can you tell us a little bit more about the type? I suppose, how long were the Cayman Islands in lockdown for? Tell us.
So yeah, so we had overall, so we would have gone into say lockdown around the end of March, and there was no real end date in sight, which I think is kind of what was scary for us, because I moved here with my boyfriend, and we didn't really know like what was happening, and like if we were going to be able to get home. And he had just started a new job, and he was working from home, and I was working in a hair salon here at the time, and that was closed, so I wasn't working because obviously I couldn't work from home. And so I was just at home doing weekly Zoom calls with my family, which kept me sane or insane, not really sure. So like I feel like everyone else. And we basically went into lockdown at the end of March, and we had daily press conferences with the government here that were televised, and that was kind of everyone's like highlight of the day, which was a little bit sad now looking back. But we basically all
Yeah,
tuned in at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the day,
yeah,
and we listened to like the governor and the health minister, and they gave us the stats of the day of people who were tested, and how many people were positive, and how many were negative, and where we were going, because nobody had any idea of how long more we were going to be in this for. So when I finished up in my job at the end of March, I honestly thought I would be back to work in 2 weeks. I
okay,
was like, yeah, see you guys in 2 weeks. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be great. And I didn't go back to work until September.
right.
So yeah,
And tell us a little bit about how,
6 months.
during the lockdown itself. So it sounds like it started in the end of March.
Yeah,
And
end of March.
up to
And then
September.
yeah. So that was kind of, it was like, yeah. So basically what the hard rules that they brought in were the curfews, which definitely worked.
Okay.
And
tell us a little bit about the curfew. So you had to be off the streets at a certain time in the day?
Yeah. So they brought in different kind of curfews. In the very beginning, it was a hard curfew of you weren't allowed out. I actually had a photo so that I wouldn't mess it up of the times, because you even though it became very normal, you actually kind of forget of what the hours were.
For sure.
Well, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so like in the 24th of March, the curfew was from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily.
Right.
So you were allowed out, but that was only for emergencies. And they had police on the road. They had like roadblocks, and if you got stopped, you had to either have a letter stating why you were on the road, and if you didn't, you were fined 3,000 Cayman Island dollars. And Cayman Island dollars and euro are basically 1 for 1, which is terrifying. So
Wow.
it's basically you were fined 3,000 euro.
Okay,
if you were on the road.
so it sounds like that.
And people were fine.
Yes, but it sounds like there that essentially the message they were putting out was, we're taking this seriously. This is a serious virus.
Absolutely, and that was it. And at the end of the day, they kind of just really put it out there that you have no reason to be out of your house, is what they kept telling us. Like, you have no reason to be outside. And like, because everyone was working from home, and yeah, then people started kind of like losing their minds because we were all in our houses. So they allowed us obviously then to be, then people were like, well, what about grocery shopping? So then they brought in a surname rule, which I know sounds a bit crazy. And I told my mom about this, who's living in Ireland.
Yes.
I told my mom, and they brought in the surname rule, and it actually worked very well. So basically, if you had A to K were allowed Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then L to Z were allowed Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and you weren't allowed to take children with you to the supermarket. And there was police at the doors checking ID, and you were fined if you were out not on your name day. So that was another thing that they did. So it was just, it was all kind of about fines, but like, and it wasn't like 100 euro here and there. Like, it was intense fines. And like, so me, like, because myself and my boyfriend don't have the same surname, there was a solid 6 months where we didn't go shopping together for 6 months, which was good and bad. But it was that intense. Like, there wasn't a day where we kind of thought, oh, we'll just go together, it'll be fine, because we would have been fined.
Okay.
So it was very intense.
Okay. So, and that's very interesting, because we know in Ireland that you can, I suppose there was lots of reports in the media where you could book a flight there a couple of weeks ago, and you could arrive at the airport and you might be fined 100 euros.
Yeah.
So I suppose essentially, like, the key takeaway I would take there in terms of the differences between, I suppose, just with that little bit of information about I suppose the deterrence and what the message the government and the Cayman were trying to convey here is this is really, really, really serious.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
That there is a fine in place, but the fine is so big they want it to act as a deterrent for those people who might, and we look there's always those people and who might just break the rules, to say, oh my God, 3,000, I'm not going to risk this. Whereas 3,000 euros versus 100 euro.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was definitely, I feel like that was the main thing that they were trying to convey, that like, and like they kept us towards, like, when it went past 2 weeks, and when we kind of got more into it, they did keep us, like, the government kept us very in the loop. Like, they would release a lot of statements, and they had like all Instagram pages, and they would release like little photos on their Instagram pages like why I should be out today and or why I shouldn't be out today. And you know, if it was like a holiday, because they are quite like religious here. So for Easter, for example, usually a tradition here is that everyone goes camping. So last year they weren't allowed to do that. So they had to put out a bulletin. They had to put out like a statement just to remind the Caymanian people, you know, we know that this is a tradition, but there's still a pandemic. You guys are not allowed to do this. Like it's not happening. And that was monitored, and it was like, you know, it was put out there that nobody was allowed to go camping, and that it wasn't allowed to happen, and that there was still a curfew in place, and that there would still be fines even though it was a public holiday. And then I feel like the one that kind of upset a lot of people was they started putting a curfew, and they put a hard curfew on the beaches, which I know sounds very sad for people that live here.
Yes.
But basically people were using the beaches as like their way of getting like of exercise, and you know, but I think then people started to kind of use it as, oh, I'll go to the beach for my exercise, and they'd bring like a 6-pack of cans.
Oh, gotcha.
So,
Gotcha. Okay.
You're gonna have those people everywhere, right? So like you're gonna
Absolutely.
you know, and so then basically they started doing the hard lockdown on the beaches, which was really tough because people were using that as their kind of their escape of their houses. So you were allowed 90 minutes a day, regardless of, oh, so the exercise and the surname day did not apply to your exercise. So
Okay.
you were allowed to exercise for 90 minutes every day, but you weren't allowed to go, like that had to be around your house.
Okay.
So we weren't allowed, say, for example, like drive to go to exercise,
Okay.
but we were allowed walk around our house. But then on Sundays, like every Sunday, it was a hard lockdown. Like you weren't allowed outside.
Okay.
Like hard lockdown, hard curfew. Like we could maybe go outside our estate and walk around our estate, but you have no reason to be on the roads on Sunday.
Okay.
So that was a bit intense.
Yeah, and so it sounds like that you've been out of lockdown now since September. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what life is like now and since last September on the island.
I feel bad. It's lovely. It's very much back to normal. But I feel like as well, I do have to say, like, our airport is still closed.
Okay.
We have a very strict quarantine and process. Like, I mean, very, very strict quarantine and process. So I have no problem with not wearing a mask around the island, because I know that I have no way of catching COVID, because if like we do have positive cases here, and
Yes.
they really, like, we have probably at the moment maybe 20 active cases,
Okay.
but like no one is concerned because they're all in quarantine.
Okay, so that's interesting. So because that's a big topic of conversation here in Ireland, and it has been for a year, because our National Public Health Emergency Team last June 2020 have been calling for mandatory hotel quarantine for all arrivals from every single country in the world.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't implemented until 2 weeks ago. All right.
Bizarre.
Now, and this is so frustrating because we are this is our third lockdown in Ireland. But lockdown 2 and lockdown 3, which is the one we're in now, are less effective than the first lockdown, because the first lockdown we got the case numbers down to 2 cases a day.
Yeah.
And there was huge pressure from businesses and lobby groups to open the country up for businesses. And of course, we all know what happened. We opened up for business, and the case numbers started going up and up and up and up and up. And then we had to go from back into lockdown from October until the 2nd of December. We reopened again for a meaningful Christmas. Yeah. And by the last week in December, the case numbers were heading towards 6,000. And we've been in a lockdown since December the 30th now, when the case numbers, I think they peaked at 9,000 to 10,000 cases a day. Now, and people flew home from Christmas, so the government in Ireland ignored public health advice. They made a decision, and it was a business decision that was made, to put the interests of making money ahead of public health, which is a folly, because which is short-sighted, because if the health of the nation is compromised, and let's face it, COVID causes so much harm and damage, then you don't have an economy. So we've been on our third lockdown since then. But what I want to maybe explore a little bit is around the quarantine, because we mentioned this a few weeks ago when we were chatting for this event, and you mentioned things like having to wear bracelets and things like this. So if I book a flight now, I'll book my flight here to the Cayman Islands, and I'll, as some people might do, is I might say, oh, I'm going to the Caymans to get my teeth done. I need dental treatment. So if I arrive in the Cayman Islands, are you able to tell me a little bit of what might happen to me when I arrive?
So you need to have a PCR test done first. You need to be negative. And then that needs to be submitted. So for anyone that's traveling here, they have a specific team, as far as I'm aware now. This is like to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
Because obviously I haven't left this island since 2000. I haven't left since I went home for Christmas in 2019, the end of 2019.
Yeah.
So like I haven't left since then, which is awful because it's a very small island. So people get island fever. It's a real thing.
Okay.
So they have a specific team dedicated towards people that are leaving in and out, and you would need to contact a team. I think it's called like Travel Time or Travel Cayman or Travel Time something, and you would reach out and say, hey, I booked my flights, here's my PCR test, I'm negative, my name is Jason, blah blah blah, I'm traveling by myself or I'm traveling with blah blah blah, here are their PCR tests, whatever, blah, blah, blah. We're staying here. You have to give a location. So you either stay at in the beginning when there was no other option, it was government facility. So that was paid for originally by the government. And that was when there was people coming back. So like maybe originally they were trying to get Caymanian kids back who were, because like a lot of Caymanian kids will go to school in the UK and the US. Okay. So when this all happened, they were trying to get a lot of people back to their families. So a lot of kids were brought back, which was really nice, but they were all brought back and essentially put into well, they call it a government facility. It was a hotel. Okay. But a little bit of an isolated hotel, and you were essentially picked up at the airport. You were tested on the spot and then put onto a bus and then brought to the hotel, the government facility, put into your room. And then there was essentially security guards on the door for the 2 weeks, and you were not allowed in or out. And that was what happened then. Since then, you can now, there's 3 options. So you can go to a government facility, which is a hotel. You can go to like another hotel, like a fancier hotel if you want, but it can cost you about €9,000, which is outrageous. But you're still in essentially a hotel room. You don't get anything else fancier about it. You might get nicer food, but you still have to do your 2 weeks. You have to do 14 days. Although they have brought out since then, if you're vaccinated, you may only have to do 10, but I don't know what's going on there. But it's still 14 days. Okay. You have to test negative on the 14th day. If you don't, they'll keep you in. There's like no getting around that. And
did you mention? Tell me a little bit about. Wasn't there a scenario where you, if you couldn't go to a hotel, you could maybe quarantine at home, but you had to wear a tracking bracelet or something?
So that was example 2. So then the third one that they've only kind of brought in recently is for people if they have homes here. So if I was to leave, for example, or even if you were to come here, a lot of people have started putting up their homes or even like vacation homes as like Airbnbs. So if you decided, I actually don't want to stay in a hotel, I don't want to stay in a government facility, I'm going to look up an Airbnb that is government approved. Okay. So all home quarantines have to be government approved, where the government will come in and approve the home and surrounding areas and geofence the house.
Right.
So essentially, you then know, say if I wasn't here and I said to you, all right, you can quarantine in my house, not a bother. The government would have to come here, or whoever, that team, they would assess my home and say, yeah, okay, she's not sharing the house with anybody. They check a lot of things. Not sharing the house with anyone. You're not sharing your kitchen with anyone. Your AC units are in the house itself. It's not going into any other, like it's not a shared AC unit.
Okay.
You don't have a shared back garden. You're not going to be using a shared pool. Like, you're not allowed to leave the house or anything like that.
And for anyone, just for anyone watching who would just clarify, I'm sure most people know, but just to be sure, AC unit is an air conditioning unit. So
Air
of course
conditioning unit.
we know they get really nicer weather in the Cayman Islands, especially maybe during the summer than they do in Ireland. So you'd need the
So
air
the air
conditioning.
conditioning, yeah, so the air conditioning, because
So
that would all be air. So then you would come and you would get a bracelet, and I think there's like a specific name for it that you can look up, but basically you would then be brought to the house, and they geofence you into the house, so that basically if you take a step outside the house, you'll have police at your door relatively soon. So you get the bracelet, and you also get like a government phone. So they'll call you at random times. Like, I've had friends that have done quarantine in a house, and they'll call you at random times, check up on you. They'll make sure that, and like, they'll just make sure that you're just always at home, basically. Like, they know where everyone is at all times.
yeah, and again, it sounds like it sounds like that the government took this quite seriously when it comes to quarantining people, and whereas, and it sounds like that this started very early on in 2020. Whereas we've only started this 2 weeks ago, and actually just in the last couple of weeks, or last week, there was an argument. France, Germany and Italy have had a massive spike in cases.
Okay.
And France have cases in some of the numbers coming out of France this week were 50-60,000 cases a day.
Wow.
And there's variants running rampant in these countries. But we've had some government ministers, there's arguments in the Irish government as to whether we should allow, like, people from France, Germany and Italy can still fly in here and they don't have to quarantine. And it's almost become a political thing where, some government ministers have said, I find this incredibly silly, and I scratch my head. We shouldn't be stopping. If somebody wants to fly in from France, France shouldn't be added to the list because there's lots of Irish people living in France. This is the kind of messaging we're getting from government. But I want to maybe I want your reaction to something here, Sinead. I'm going to try and play a video here
technology
during the live stream. Okay. So just bear with me.
Everything off.
Everything off for a sec there. So I'm just going to try and play this video here. Let me just see, and if we can do this. And I want your reaction to this. So just see. Okay.
God, I'm terrible at hiding my emotions now. So here we go.
No, you're okay. Just let me see if we can do this. Okay. So we had Micheál Martin made a speech last week.
Okay.
About maybe I might be able to play the video, but not to worry. So look, I'm going to read this. This is a Micheál Martin's statement last week, our Taoiseach, right? So apologies now to anyone from watching, not being able to play the segment, but I'm going to read the quote. This is what he said. So the disease we are dealing with now is a very different beast to that which we were facing at the beginning of the first lockdown in Ireland more than 54 weeks ago. The so-called UK or B117 variant is essentially a new virus. It is more transmissible and it is a significantly more dangerous virus. the reality of the B117 variant is that if it is given any space at all, it spreads very quickly and the consequences are terrible. All across Europe now, it is causing very serious difficulties and yet another surge. Now, just to put that in context, about 40 seconds after that speech, in the same speech, he went on to talk about the reopening of society.
Baffling.
And from next Monday, we're on average at about 3 to 4 to 500, between 3 and 500 cases a day now. We've been in lockdown since December at the 30th, but we're at between 300 and 500 cases a day now. With that paragraph I've read out to you,
yeah,
all secondary school pupils are going back to school on Monday.
Yeah,
all primary schools are going back. And when the key point of that little bit of the speech that I read out, though, what I would hone in on is when he says is the essentially, if we give this virus space, it transmits very, very quickly, and the consequences are terrible. So just as an Irish person, not in Ireland, when you hear that, how does that make you feel, or what do you think?
I mean, it's really upsetting. It's honestly very baffling that someone can say those words and then say, but let's put all of these kids into a space and see what happens. Like, I don't really understand why you'd put kids back to school having just said you think that this virus is pretty bad if you give it the space to grow.
And the space to grow is almost like when he says the reality of the B117 variant is that if it is given any space at all, it spreads very, very quickly and the consequences are terrible. So, and then to turn around, we've laid out a roadmap of reopening. Construction workers are going to be going back to work on certain dates. But essentially it's the schools, and many countries in Europe are so far ahead of us in terms of masks. So children are going back into classrooms and they're not wearing any masks next week. So there's going to be approximately the movement next week of up to 1 million people in society. So I don't know, like it's baffling. It really, really is baffling. And here in We Can Be Zero, what we've advocated for is lots of the stuff we've been talking about that the Cayman Islands have done is an effective lockdown, because if your lockdowns are effective, and we had a lockdown between March and July last year, it was very, very effective. But where we're lacking is when we reopen, we don't have a public health team. We don't. Our public health doctors don't have the resources to, for example, if there's an outbreak in a particular county, our public health doctors don't have staff. They don't have the contact tracing technology and equipment to be able to get in very, very quickly and crush the outbreaks before they become a problem for wider society. But I wanted to have you any insights or any information you could share in terms of over in the Caymans, if there is a cluster of cases of COVID, have you insights as to what might happen in the Cayman Islands? How do the Cayman authorities deal with it? Can you share any information around that?
I mean, currently?
Yes.
I mean, at the moment, everyone they're in quarantine. So as far as I know, the information that we're being given, we have no positive cases in the community.
Yes.
So everyone that comes onto this island has to quarantine for 2 weeks, no matter where you're coming from, no matter who you are. Nobody gets exemptions, like nobody. Everyone has to quarantine, and you have to do your 2 weeks, and you have to be negative. So people that are walking amongst me, I know have either not left or they've done their 2 weeks and they're negative. So when we get our little news alerts and they say, oh, we've had 2 positives today, nobody panics because they're in quarantine.
And how are they in quarantine? Like how does that happen? Do they voluntarily have to contact their GP to be tested? And
Well,
if
no,
there's a positive
because
test, have you any insights into how they end up in quarantine with a positive case?
so I guess what I mean is they're they're testing positive because they've traveled in.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we don't have, so in the beginning, when it was community based,
Yes.
if you were positive, you had to quarantine in your home.
Okay.
And then that's, I guess, so yeah, okay. So in the beginning, when it was in the community, what happened was, if you had symptoms, they had a flu line and you called your GP and you did a kind of like an online assessment. They had an online tool that you used. And then if you were positive, or if you felt like you were positive, you went and you got tested and you quarantined, and you did a volunteer, like you would kind of self-quarantine yourself at home until you heard back if you were negative or not. Then once they got all the cases down, and once they realized that we didn't have as many cases as we realized we did, we had no community cases. So now when there's a positive case, it's found from people who are trying to get out of quarantine, that are trying to get out of either their home quarantine or the government facilities. So it's either found on day 1 of people traveling in from a plane, or day 14 of people who think that they're done their quarantine and they're still positive.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
So that's why when we get a positive, I know that it's someone who's being monitored by a team, because like, for example, it's highly unlikely that I would go for a voluntary test right now and be positive.
Okay.
Because I've not been in contact with anybody who's positive. And it's just, yeah, I think we're just in a pretty good position right now, I guess, as well, because like they kind of know where all of our positives are.
And
well,
I suppose
we hope they do.
and when we talk about an effective lockdown, it sounds like, certainly to me anyway, that the Cayman Islands are reaping the rewards now, and everyone who's resident there are reaping the rewards and the benefits from the sacrifices that you made between that 3 or 4 month period last year. Would that be a fair?
Definitely. And I feel like the whole, like, and the thing is as well, the people that suffered, and the hotels, and because the hotels really would benefit from tourists and from tourism and everyone, but the locals and the people who live here, I feel like, have been very generous with trying to support everyone, and everyone has been like supporting local, well, obviously because getting things sent in here is quite difficult anyway, but yeah. When, like, everyone has been doing like staycations and staying in the hotels here, and really helping out as much as we can, because we only really kind of, I guess, like, have each other. And as well as that, like, I was speaking to my boyfriend last night about this, and he made a very good point. Like, Cayman is very financially I'm trying to think of the word, like, based. So even though
there's a big financial services sector, you mean, in the Caymans, yeah? Okay.
So, like, even though tourism stopped, everyone was still working from home that were based in the financial services. So, like,
Gotcha.
that was really kind of keeping a lot of the economy going as well.
Okay.
So, like, yeah, say 50% is tourism, but a lot of, like, everyone was still working from home. So it was kind of still kind of keeping, I guess, Cayman going. It's kind of, it's hard to kind of to tell, like, what actually, like, I don't know. It's tough. It's tough looking back now, and it's tough seeing Ireland in, like, the way that it is. And I understand that, like, being in the 3rd lockdown, I'm sure people are just withered, and, like, that's why it's becoming less and less effective, because I'm speaking to, like, all my family at home, and they're just they're just sick of it. Everyone's just
Well,
sick of it.
yeah, and the I suppose, yeah, a lot of people are fed up. And I suppose what we're fed up with is with government. A lot of people
Yeah.
are fed up with government because you know, that statement that I read out to you, that was the first 38 seconds of an 8-minute speech from the Taoiseach last week, and then he says things, you know, with regards, if we give this any space at all, the consequences are terrible. And then, okay, on this date we're going to open schools. On this
Yeah.
date we're going to open golf clubs. On this
So
date,
counterproductive. Yeah.
so like certainly in here in We Can Be Zero, we feel that the government here in Ireland, and we feel we go as far as say our national public health emergency team have just waving the white they've waved the white flag at this. They've surrendered to coronavirus. And I suppose that We Can Be Zero, you know, what we have said for a long time now is the evidence is there in New Zealand, in the Cayman Islands, in Australia, in Vietnam, and a growing list of countries. Taiwan is another country, a growing list of countries that have taken a zero COVID approach. And again, just to, I suppose we'll finish up here as well, but when we say a zero COVID approach, we don't mean to get the case numbers down to zero and keep them at zero. What we mean is you get the case numbers down so low, where you create I suppose a community environment where you have zero mystery cases. So you get the case numbers so low, you break the chains of transmission of the virus, and what you do is you make it easier for our public health teams to be, if there is an outbreak, they can track and trace outbreaks, and they can crush them before they become a wider problem in society. But the issues that we've had and what we've been advocating for is we've been calling for the government to provide the resources to our public health teams, because if you don't, we've seen what's happened last July, we've seen what's happened at Christmas. So twice now we've made the mistake of not managing the outbreaks effectively, while also only implementing mandatory hotel quarantine 2 weeks ago. But it's half-hearted. We're adding on countries. And we're saying, well, we were not going to add on this country because there's lots of Irish people here. But a virus does not turn around and say, oh, there's lots of Irish people in France, so we won't travel to France and infect people and create variants there.
Thing,
so
like you can't make any exceptions, and like it's hard, it's tough, and it is really hard. And like I had a lot of friends here that wanted to come home, or like that had reasons for their family to try and get here, and it was very heartbreaking. And there was reasons that they wanted to be here, and they still had to go through the 2 weeks. And like, for not for reasons obviously I won't say, but like you would want to write to government and say, oh, but can you not just, like, she's negative, can she not just skip past the 2-week quarantine, like she really needs her family right now, look, for even in a case of like bereavement, like, no. And like it's hard and it's awful, but there was no exceptions. And like it sounds really cold-hearted, but there was really just no exceptions. There was no exceptions from where you were from, who you were, who you knew, or like where you were coming from. You just
and that makes sense. But that makes sense because it's the greater good. It's the greater good of society. And I would certainly have a lot of empathy and sympathy for people who are looking for those exceptions in that situation.
Oh my God, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. But on the other side of it, you can see and understand the reasons why. One thing I want to finish up with you, Sinead, today is, and this is, I want to ask you this question. So looking back on the sacrifices that you had to make and how tough it was between March and September last year, was it worth it?
100%. Oh, I would, yeah, absolutely. I feel like, yeah, looking back, it definitely was. And without a doubt, I went through everything last night with with my boyfriend, and we went through everything that we went through because I'd gone through one of the Instagram pages of all the curfews, and he was like, "Oh yeah, remember we had the curfew? Remember the surnames?" And it seems like it was ages ago, but it was so like, and it was crazy at the time. And I remember telling all of my family in Ireland that, oh yeah, it's my day to go to the grocery store. Ronan can't come with me because his surname is different to mine, and they all thought we were crazy, but it was worth it. Like,
Absolutely.
now we don't
Well,
have to wear masks and
well,
we get to live our lives.
well, what
Well,
I will definitely
not me.
say is everyone here within the We Can Be Zero team, and I'm sure everyone in Ireland and your friends and family are so happy that you guys are out of lockdown. I'll certainly on behalf of We Can Be Zero, we're very happy that you're safe and that your boyfriend is safe, and we're happy that you guys are enjoying life because, and look, can I just want to say thank you as well for joining us and sharing your story today, because we need to hear this in Ireland. People need to hear this. There is a roadmap, and there is a structure, and what Cayman Islands have more in common with Ireland than we don't. Right, population sizes might be different,
Yeah,
GDP might be different, but we are an island, and Ireland should be taking advantage of its island status.
absolutely.
We are an island. All cases in Ireland, well, we might have community transmission now. They started because it was flown in here.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so look, I'm going to end today by saying, look, again, thank you for joining this live event. And We Can Be Zero, once again, we're calling on the government to change the strategy. Living with COVID does not work. It will not eliminate, it will not, it's bad for the economy. It's bad for society. A short, sharp lockdown here in We Can Be Zero, we say an effective lockdown of 4 to 6 weeks, resource our public health teams and implement mandatory hotel quarantine properly, and we could be more or less back to normal. We Can
Yeah.
Be Zero. Sinead, thanks for joining us today
Thank
on
you.
this live event, and
Good day.
enjoy the day, enjoy your Friday in the Cayman Islands. Take care.
Thanks. Have
Bye
a good
bye.
one.
Bye bye.